All right, well, thank you all for coming. Thank you again for your patience. And welcome to our fall symposium. I am Daniela. I am the president of the Hunter Translation Society, which is a student-led organization that promotes, encourages, and supports budding interpreters and translators, as well as those that are already experienced. And you could find out more about us on our webpage, huntertranslationsociety.wordpress.com. Our Instagram and LinkedIn pages are also linked there as well. And like I said, we are recording this symposium so that we will post it later to our website. And this is my third semester in the MATI program, and my language pair is English and Spanish. And so I'm going to let Julie, Anna, and then Ziwen to briefly introduce yourselves, please.
Good evening and welcome. This is exciting. This is our third symposium, really. And I'm supposed to be facing the camera like that. So yes, and the program is entering its third year. This evening we will have 3 panels, and we're drawing on a number of students and some of our faculty and associates, as well as a special group from Toronto. And what marks this as a special symposium is that we are focusing on interpreting. So I will not go too far into this. You all know me. I'm the director of the Masters in Translation and Interpreting, and I'm very excited that you've all come to this event, and I'm sure we'll have lots of discussion. So next will be Anna.
Thank you so much, Professor. Hello, everyone. My name is Anna, and I'm the Vice President of the Hunter Translation Society. And I'm currently in my 3rd semester at the MATI program. I'm on the Russian-English track. And some of my interests include literary translation and linguistics. And today I have the honor of moderating the faculty panel, which will be our 3rd panel at the end of the evening. And thank you all very much to our listeners, to our panelists, to our students for coming today. And yes, I think that's all. So Ziwen, please go ahead.
So hi everyone, I'm Ziwen, the only in-person HTS member here. So I'm so glad to see you guys here and online. It's been a while to prepare this symposium. I'm so glad everyone's here. So hope you can enjoy this symposium and learn something from that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's just jump right into it. We're going to start with the student panel. So very briefly, panelists, if you could just introduce yourselves as well. And we can start with Adriana, please.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can.
Hola. Well, my name is Adriana Caballero, and I was born in Mexico. I'm a certified medical interpreter, and I'm so happy that finally we're getting in the place where we're honoring interpretation, because not a lot of people, and we always get confused with translators, but no, we're interpreters. As I mentioned, I'm certified. I'm currently working at one of the hospitals in the language services department, and I'm proud that I'm had the chance to work and doing volunteering for people in different organizations. And I think that's it. Welcome.
Awesome, thank you so much. Can we have Salma next?
Hi everyone, my name is Salma. Mati student. I'm in my 4th semester, final semester. Currently, I'm a volunteer interpreter, doing medical interpreting, striving towards making that my full-time job, and also doing a bit of freelance on the side. So yeah, as Adriana said, super excited, to finally get, get recognition for interpreters and to talk a little bit more about the work that we do.
Thank you very much. And let's go with Gary and then Christina. Are you there? All right, let's go with Christina for now, please.
Hello, can everyone hear me? My name is Cristina Utreras. This is my second semester as a MATI student. I am currently a court certified interpreter. I work for Bronx Supreme Criminal and Civil Court. I'm also very excited to be here and to just listen and learn from everyone that will participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Gary, are you there? Is everything all right? All right, it could be that he had to step away. Well, let's begin. So first, let me just remind you of how this is going to go. Hopefully Gary can join us very shortly. So I'm going to ask you 2 rounds of questions. After each question, you panelists will have 3 to 4 minutes to answer individually. And if we have time at the end, if any, then we're going to get some questions from the audience. Audience members, if you're not able to ask right now, every panelist's email is available to you online. And of course, if you're in person, you can ask there. All right, so the first question for you right now is, as you all said that you are all students of MATI, you also have experience. So in your opinion, is it important, is it necessary to have education, to have formal training when it comes to interpreting? And we can go in the same direction. We can start with Adriana and then Sarah.
Well, I would like to go last because I want to talk about something else other than education, which is another part, but maybe someone can start.
I can definitely go ahead. I would say definitely we need education. I can't tell you the amount of mistakes that I made even from a year ago to now. Definitely I've seen a lot of progress in my own interpreting, and as I'm seeing other people go through their own experiences, either doing freelance, even doing medical interpreting, you see the evolution that people tend to go through as they start to learn, more and more. I think without education, it's possible, but not at the level of somebody who has formal education. Of course, experience is always going to be great help, but with education, again, it's just going to point you towards in the right direction. For now, that's all I can add, but I will definitely come back to it once I get some more. Thank you.
All right, Christina, you can go ahead, please. Thank you, Salma.
Sure, so yeah, I definitely agree with Salma. Formal training is very important, specifically because people mistakenly believe that all it takes to be an interpreter is to be bilingual, and that can be further from the truth. The reality is that to do this job, you need a set of skills that really go beyond mastering 2 or more languages. You need to learn to think on the spot, make split-second decisions, remembering that as interpreters, we focus on meaning and not just words. Also, you need to be multicultural. We need to familiarize ourselves with regionalisms, idioms, even accents. No matter what field you decide to follow, whether it's the medical, the legal field, there's a code of ethics also that you should learn and follow. And if you're interested, for example, in court interpreting, I'm a court interpreter, learning the legal system in your area, visiting courtrooms, learning legal terminology will definitely be helpful once you start in this journey. And remembering that we are there to bridge a communication gap and mastering our skills, working on our short-term memory, long-term memory, note-taking skills. This is a job that requires constant learning. If you're passionate about just never-ending learning, just understanding that there will never be a day that you will be satisfied with everything that you've learned, then this is definitely the profession for you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. Gary, are you there? Thank you. So we're just answering the first question. Would you like me to repeat?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the first question is, that as a MATI student, someone with experience in interpreting, why do you think, or is education, formal education and training important to be an interpreter?
It's important because it enriches the learning experience and makes a person a better interpreter. I've been amazed. I've only been in the program for a few weeks, and what I've picked up in my translation classes and in my language classes has been absolutely astounding. You're looking at experiential diversity, you're looking at linguistical diversity, cultural diversity, and all of these things come together in the classroom, together with the excellent education provided by our professors. And what happens is we have the students and the lecturers, and we have a symbiotic relationship. One feeds off the other. We feed off each other's experiences and knowledge. And in addition, there's in addition a synergy, which is that when you put more than one mind together, you have a whole bunch of minds together coming from different places, well, 1 + 1 = 3. And so the whole experience is truly heightened in this fashion. And then, of course, there's what we learn. But it's, for me, it has been so enriching. For example, I found out from my Hebrew professor, and no one asked, I didn't ask him about that. He said there's a student he knows of doing her doctoral dissertation on working to make the Hebrew language gender neutral. She's gone to the extent that she has changed the font, which normally a mem would have a circular part and then a straight line down. By putting a space between those two sections, she now can have a end letter, which could mean two things. In Hebrew, the male way is saying atem, and the female way is saying aten. But by making that split in the letter mem, you can end up seeing both genders. So you're saying he/she without having to say that. So this person, and I spoke with my professor about gender neutrality and transitioning the language or altering the language. Everybody knows it's incredibly difficult to do that. You have one language which has, specific genders. You have the second language which has specific genders, and then you have to translate from one language to the other. It's seemingly insurmountable. However, my Hebrew professor is the ultimate optimist, and he had said that he envisions that it will be possible in the Hebrew language, which is very specific in many ways, to establish gender neutrality. All there has to be is the will to get it done. If we can build atomic bombs and all kinds of technological things, we can certainly make adjustments to the Hebrew language. All of these ideas I would not have been exposed to if not for me being in the Maddie program. And it's been truly enriching.
Thank you very much. All right, Adriana, please.
Well, I totally agree with my colleagues. I mean, education and training is very important. I don't know how many times I'm talking to a patient and they're telling me, oh, my daughter speaks perfect English and perfect Spanish. Can she come and work as an interpreter for you? No. You need like a lot of training. It's not that you're bilingual. We were talking about that before. It's extremely difficult to determine bilingualism. Plus, in addition, really interpreting is more complex than just learning simple oral skills like memory or like terminology. I think it goes way beyond. I always thought that the better interpreters are better with time, like wine, because of experience and the things they're exposed to and things that they learn or pick up from either volunteering, training, and also in the specific case of, and that's what I would like to talk about certification, that there's a lot of continuing education. Because, I'm talking because I'm a medical interpreter, and as I mentioned before, yeah, education and training is vital. But this part of education and training is just the first step. For instance, when you become a medical interpreter, it's more than education. I mean, you need to get acquainted with medical terminology, human anatomy, different medical procedures in addition to being trained in the, the actual healthcare protocols to work independently and know your grounds, because it's not that you're just interpreting. You know what to do or what not to do when you're interpreting in an operating room. And also during this time and experience, your language skills become more and more specialized. And this is the part where I would like to talk about. I would like to recommend that any people, either they're on the healthcare or legal field, to get certified, because getting certified is better for all of us. After COVID, a lot of healthcare organizations are realizing the benefits of working with certified interpreters. Why? Because then you have less risk management, the cost control is less, compliance, and also there's a lot of, and not a lot of people know that there's a lot of governmental funding to get these language services to LEPs, limited, I always remember and I always forget about that. It's limited English proficiency persons. And of course, it brings higher satisfaction for everybody around. And also, I would like to tell the students that it's important to learn, but it's also important to get certified. Why? Because there's more demand after COVID, and also there's tons of benefits. I mean, you can get better rates if you're doing freelancing, and also you can get higher paying jobs in the healthcare field. It's not that, it's like getting better and every day. And also because of that, of the demand that came from COVID, there are several now, a lot of options for interpreters to work. You can do it either face or remotely, through video or phone. And, it's important regarding certification. I don't know if, well, there's a lot of people like, oh, you're certified, but please be aware of the companies, because when you're doing freelance, you will find a lot of companies and agencies that will certify you. It's important to get a national certification. There are several entities that could provide that, like CCHI, NBCMI, IMAI. And that would be like just the first step of getting like a part of something bigger. And also, education doesn't end when you finish MATI or when you finish your class. It's every day with experience and continuing education, because things change enormously every day, especially in the different fields. So when you start as an interpreter, it's not like a race, it's like a marathon. You have to, and you have to.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your responses. Yeah, interpreting, I mean, there's so many nuances and even etiquette to take into account. So definitely training and certification, everything that you said is very vital. All right, so the last question from me is, so all of you work and have experience in the courts, in the medical field. So when you're dealing with an individual that you have to interpret for, who is stressed, frustrated, maybe even traumatized, depending on the situation, how do you use empathy to manage that situation and also to serve that individual better? Yeah, Gary, you can go ahead first. Oh, you're muted, sorry. It's fine.
I find that empathy is critical in these high stress situations in a family court, in a criminal court, where people are on edge. They could lose rights to their children, lose their own rights. They can be forced to pay child support, to pay money. They have a lawsuit because they've been wronged. Some perhaps judge they feel has wronged them, and they have a lawsuit going there. So what I found is, they gave us a course, the court system gave us a course in something called verbal judo, the gentle art of persuasion, because they felt it would help when we're dealing with other people to understand what to do. And believe it or not, the main principle that runs through that whole course is empathy. And with empathy, something almost magical can be achieved. This book was written for police force, and matter of fact, in the academy, all police officers and in the Academy for Court Officers. Everyone is required to take this course. So what it does, I've applied it to a civilian situation so that people could understand an example. The key is, in my mind, to, if I understand everything that's going on in that person's mind, then I can address what they're concerned about, and that alleviates tension hugely. The example I used was, I was supervising a group of 20 or so employees at the county clerk's office. And in the county clerk's office, people come for information. What was filed in my case, I'd like to see which documents are there or not there. So they can come in person and do it, or they used to be able to do it by phone. Then a memo came out saying, since we have a website, no longer can people get the information by telephone. They must either come in person or use the website. There was an uproar. People, it was 2007. The internet was not as widely spread used as it had been, as it is now, excuse me. So we would get phone calls, and the employees would answer the phone, and they'd say, Gary, please, I need you to take this call, because I was doing the troubleshooting. Whenever there was a difficult call, I would handle it. And so I experienced the whole gamut of excuses. I don't have a computer. I'm computer illiterate. I don't know how to use a website. Usually my computer throws me off, etc. All of the excuses. So I like to talk with a person in person, etc. Some of the more egregious, well, not egregious, some of the more difficult excuses were, all the time that you've spent explaining this to us, you could have given us the information. And then the worst of all is when you have somebody saying, I pay your salary, I want the information. So you dodge that a little bit, but then once I understood the full scope of the issues, then the next call that I got, I thought about it, and the person said, could you please tell me what documents have been filed in my case? So I said to them, how would you like me to give you access to the very same information that we have in our court computers? The answer was, oh yeah, that's wonderful, terrific, it's great, wow. I said, you have a pen handy? Take down the following 4 steps. Step 1, type in Kings County Clerk at courts.gov. Second step, click on Clerk's Minutes. Third step, enter the index number. Fourth step, press enter. Oh, wow, that's fantastic. It's beautiful, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. Essentially, I told them, I'm not giving you any information over the phone. You have to go find it yourself. But by addressing the concerns, all of the concerns that people have, I was able to not only alleviate stress and tension and confrontation.
I'm sorry, you muted yourself.
Because I understood all of those issues that people had, I was able to meet those issues, meet those concerns, and it not only alleviated the tension, the stress of communication with a bureaucrat, which we know is sometimes not so much fun, but it put that person at ease, and it also taught them how to use our website. And they were walking around very happy, thanking me profusely, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I probably made them have a better day. So that's what empathy does. And just as an aside, I have nothing to do with me. That it's a wonderful course, wonderful book, Verbal Judo, The Gentle Art of Persuasion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's hear from Christina, please.
Sure. So I think this is a very interesting question because empathy in a legal setting, I think it's limited for 2 reasons. First, our code of ethics demands that we remain neutral and impartial during proceedings, that we limit our participation to interpreting. And second, for vicarious trauma, which, just to briefly explain, it can be understood as the absorbing or of another person's trauma. It's a cumulative effect of just witnessing or hearing about trauma. So I personally, given the nature of the cases that I see, I try to detach myself as much as possible. It's not always possible. And to me, just to answer the question, doing my job well is in and of itself an act of empathy. Understanding that I am there to provide a service, I am there to bridge a communication gap. And by doing my job and doing it well, I'm providing equal standing to the non-English speaker. Understanding that this means that I'm not adding, that I'm not omitting, that I'm not paraphrasing, explaining, that I am interpreting everything that is being said. Colorful language, if you will, absolutely everything. Just giving this person a voice. And by maintaining the register, not dumbing it down, like some people say, sugar-coated, improving my skills, just preparing myself to do the best job that I can, that is, in my opinion, the best way I can show empathy to others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go with Salma and then Adriana, please.
So I cannot agree more with Cristina. Definitely, empathy, was one of the things I struggled most with beginning the job doing freelance. I'll get to the medical side of things later. But I know, of course, definitely you're supposed to remain neutral in certain situations, because if you show bias, it can compromise the work, and it's not always the best to outwardly show anything. And one of the things that really did help me in the beginning was when I was interpreting, just as Cristina stated, tone was good, everything was completely accurate, word to word to what they were saying. People started coming up to me and they were like, look, I know you can't say much, but thank you so much for delivering the message. And that is what they want most. When you're able to deliver the message to the person that it's intended to, they understand and recognize that, yes, even though it's a job, you are helping them immensely. And for them, that's something there's a connection. With medical interpreting, of course, that's an even stricter area where it's just very difficult for you to show empathy. The patient will try to come up to you, they'll try to insert themselves in a way that is not professional. But I've seen the same thing translated over into the medical field, where as long as you're doing your job, they understand that you're communicating with the provider, that you're reaching the provider with a message with all their concerns, they will be completely thankful. And that's how I can bring empathy into it. Again, as Cristina said, by doing my job. So, yeah.
Well, I agree with my colleague. Empathy can be a very tricky situation for interpreters, because how can we show empathy and respect for the people we are interpreting while we maintain our roles as impartial and unbiased? Because we're really communication facilitators. So how you establish a connection with someone that is anxious or traumatized without really even crossing those boundaries? That's extremely difficult. One of the things that I appreciated, it goes in relation with the first question, it's education. We do receive a lot of education as medical interpreters and how to follow a specific code of ethics, standard practices that help us to deal with these things. As I mentioned before, it's important as an interpreter to remember where we started role and where we ended, and never to overextend any type of boundary. Of course, we do feel bad, especially when you're a medical interpreter and you hear these stories. And also you have to figure out how to avoid being involved in all these situations. Because if not, at the end, you're going to be totally burned out. And well, I'm telling you, it's easier said than done, especially, for example, when we're facing someone that is having, like a nervous breakdown, or having like an issue when you're doing asylum or any other kids with cancer. So as I mentioned before, this is a tricky subject. So I would like to talk about other things that I think are more related to empathy. So as an interpreter, you have to, and this is a new thing that is going on with medical interpreting about empathic listening. Also, it's called active listening. So it's more beyond you being the conduit of the culture broker and it goes beyond just interpreting words. Active listening, specifically in medical interpretation, it's more like a compassionate process that calls more from just taking someone else's words and showing that you're communicating in other ways with that person as well. You are showing you care about them, and it's really a powerful approach. And in medical interpretation, for myself, I mean, it's paramount and it's key to enhancing any patient experience. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for your lovely responses. Absolutely. I mean, as you said, you know, when you combine interpreting and empathy, things can get a bit difficult. And even if you're not wearing the hat as an interpreter at the moment, if you're in a different sector, just as Gary was explaining, you know, empathy can also be something difficult and you have to manage it in a certain way. So thank you very much for that. We do have a few minutes for, let's say, one question from the audience as of now, and then maybe one of you lovely panelists could answer. Does anyone have questions? It could be someone online as well, not only in person.
Nobody wants to go. I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, I wanted to ask two questions, but I'm just going to ask one because you said you only have time for one. The issue of neutrality and impartiality as part of the code of ethics that we as interpreters have to follow, and the issue of how do you fit empathy into that. What do you guys think about the fact that there is an ambiguity, there is a conundrum there, and is that when I am detached and impartial, I am in some way erasing meaning because the emotional content, the nonverbal aspects of communication convey meaning as much. And I'm saying this, I'm a code interpreter too. I work at the federal level, but it's the same thing, right? I'm also required to have this aloof poker face when I'm on the stand and to convey my emotion, but I refuse to do that because I feel I'm erasing meaning when I do that. And I want to hear your opinions on the matter.
Thank you for that question. Who would like to respond? Go ahead.
I would like to respond that first, I wanted to ask you, how does the judge or whoever you're interpreting for in the courtroom, do they appreciate the fact that you're inserting your personality and therefore enhancing the interpreting experience, or is it something that is frowned upon?
They actually do. They appreciate it very much. They actually often compliment, which kind of out of character. Federal judges don't compliment anybody, not even the attorneys, which are their colleagues. But usually when they do see something like that, the reactions of the attorneys too, people react in a very positive way. It's not like when a witness is crying, I start crying after them. That's not exactly what I do. But there are ways, subtle ways, in which we as interpreters, we are performers too. We perform language when we interpret. And there are subtle ways in which we can add a little bit here and there to try to not have that erasing effect into the nonverbal aspects of language. We don't need to imitate gestures or anything, but just the tilting of the head, the different nuances of your voice, the tone, a lot of nonverbal cues can give that added, that enhanced meaning that approaches, that they feel instinctively approaches more what the original felt like.
Beautiful. I appreciate your input.
I'd like to add something. There's
Yeah, go
time.
ahead.
Well, yeah, I think it's a fine line. I think it's definitely a fine line because we do interpret sarcasm, we interpret tone, we interpret false starts, all of that, like you said, are verbal cues that we do interpret. I think that, like I said, it's a fine line that you need to find a way of maybe at the end of the day, just something that lets you know that this is where your job ends, to not let yourself get burnt out or just having an outlet. I remember one of my professors always said, have an outlet. If it's yoga, if it's dancing, whatever hobby you like, just have an outlet to just relieve all of that, because since we are always interpreting as using the first person, that could get to you. So just like I said, having an outlet, it's a fine line, but not having a stoic position also, no, that's not possible, because we do interpret emotion with our words as well. Yeah.
I don't know if I could add something. There's
Yes,
time.
go ahead. Mhm.
I would definitely, agree. I think when I was having one of my first freelance jobs, it was interpreting for a group of people who were going through a very difficult situation. I can't really say, but definitely the person who I was working with appreciated very much the tone that I was using when I was communicating with these people. And it was more, I had to use different things. One of the things, definitely, again, tone, head nods, slight tilts. I feel like using your eyes a lot is something that clicks. I don't know if a lot of people agree with this, but definitely when you see the eyes, it's kind of impossible sometimes when you're hearing these hard-hitting stories to not be a certain way or act a certain way. And I guess it depends on the context of where you are. This freelance job that I was doing was not something super formal. It was something that was a little more go with the flow. So with that, I guess I'd have more liberty. And I guess for me, it was also kind of an outlet because I was doing other jobs where I had to be stoic, but where I had this job where I was able to express myself a little bit more, it was good. It was an outlet, it was a job as well, but I think diversifying what you do can also help to manage that.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much for that question for your answers.
Can I say
so,
something?
Very, very shortly.
Quickly.
Please. Yes.
I mean, that's a great question, but as Priscilla mentioned, that's a very fine line. I think that we are not performers, that we don't have to mimic, specifically because you're just transmitting and conveying the message that is being thrown at you. And most of the time, the people, if, for example, in medical, the provider and the patient is there. So both can listen to the tone and the cadence of each. So I think the less you would bore yourself on an interpretation, the less. I don't know about legal. I'm just going to talk about myself doing interpreter, like in the medical field.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for all of your insights. I think it was a very interesting little discussion that we had. So thank you very much. So right now we're going to have our 5-minute break before Julie's team goes next panel. So thank you very much, panelists and audience as well. Thank you.
Okay, look. As you see, we're all looking at our phones because we are addicted to our phones. But because nowadays, of course, we're all preparing our notes and stuff. All right. So good evening. I'm pleased to introduce this group as 4 very good friends and colleagues who have very kindly, over the last 3 years, served as my research subjects, expert informants, and confidants. Pansy over there, she's the ringleader. She wears many hats, as we shall see. And Renee, next to her, is her prodigy, She's the youngest of this group. She specializes in medical interpreting. And here's Qibing. And Qibing is our voice of crime and justice. See if you guess where he works. And here's Li Hua. Li Hua brings her unique perspectives as a conference interpreter, right? And in some ways, she has a distance from the heart of most of our discussion in this under this research project, and I'll give you a little background. So my research actually probes the thematics, the dynamic of 3 P's, right? The P's are power, prosperity, and purpose in the livelihood of interpreters. And this thinking took place around 2019 or so, and you know what happens, right? Soon after, which brings us today to this new normal. And in those days, those years leading up, as Milena here will attest to this, we were going to the ATA conferences annually. And thanks to the many late night conversations with Pansy, so this project took shape. And basically, it was really very much in the context of ATA being very much written translation focused kind of a setting, right? And nowadays, tech focused. So interpreters, it's always struck me as being the liveliest people at the scenes. And those of you who go to the ATA conferences, and you hear clusters of them all over the hallway, fighting the talk, interrupting one another, laughing, and not least, that was how I met Pansy. Before I actually saw the person, I heard the voice, in the middle of some hallway, right? Swearing and scolding people, So, yeah, of course, right? The serious sessions such as this one, that a lot of us have been to, right, in this field. When it involves interpreters, we find that you get the hottest conversations, you get the richest and the funniest stories, right? So I think it has to do with the fact that as interpreters, we are skin and bones in the game. There's so much that we invest in, and a lot much more that we take away. And so that's what brings me to this, right? That a lot of the conversations revolve around, like I said, the dialectics of how power, how this chase after prosperity, the thrivability of our livelihood, and at the same time the purpose that sustains this work, right? How these elements interact. So there's a lot to unpack, okay? But we will drill down today on this evening on the specifics, right? The spatial context of Toronto. And that's where this group is based, and particularly interpreters working in Chinese and English as the language pair. But I think a lot of the conversations and the issues that that we're addressing would apply across the board for interpreters. So okay, we are doing this in 2 rounds, right? And I wouldn't be speaking as much as I do now, believe me. So the first round we will address power, institutional and structural dimensions of power and authority, right? As well as personal empowerment and disempowerment, right? And then in the second round, we'll turn to the brighter side, right? Prosperity and purpose. The economics that drives this work, the opportunities, right? And what sustains us beyond the money, okay? So, all right, Pansy, you ready? We start with you.
Not so much. If I tell you that I'm actually nervous, would you believe that?
Okay, so Pansy, we talked a lot over these 3 years, in the course of this research about identity and power, right?
Yeah.
In white Canada, and specifically how you struggle with and navigate Canadian society as a Chinese, and if I may add, as a not very large Chinese woman. And then, you often emphasize, I'm not Chinese, right? And what does that mean,
So share some stories of battles lost and won in this field.
That's a very tough question, although she just gave us that question like kind of early today. And I just could not come up with anything. I'm sorry, I'm just gonna disappoint everybody. No. Well, first of all, you just say I'm not a large one, and then size-wise, I'm not. That's number one. And then secondly, when it comes to the power struggle, you mentioned the power struggle. I kind of want to ask you that question back. What do you mean by that?
Whatever you think, however you interpret it and experience it.
Someone is grabbing the mic, please. Okay.
Okay, it's however, yeah, it's up to you to interpret, based on your experience, right? It's very broad.
And that's
It could
really,
be empowerment as well, right?
well, I would say that, working as a certified interpreter, the power that I get in many, many sessions are the one that I am able to, I would say, control the situation. And I am the one that would, I also like to say, dominate the conversation a lot of time in a different way. Why would I say that? Because yes, I do speak the Mandarin and Taiwanese, and then that power I have that really makes me feel that I am a superwoman when it comes to working in many settings. But sometimes when I'm in the work setting that when I'm not able to do that, often sometimes some clients, they don't really understand that what we do and they challenge us, and then sometimes I would lose the battle, meaning they would say, okay, interpreter, just give everybody a recent example that I had. I actually had an argument with a lawyer on the record. He said, well, you know what, you're interpreters, you never impartial, because you guys choose the words and you guys are not directly interpreting everything. There's just no way. And then I said to him, you are actually correct, because in terms of the Chinese and English, we don't have the direct words corresponding to each other. And then sometimes it's very difficult, but that also shows the lack of knowledge and the respect of what I do. And so I literally got into this kind of argument with him. But by arguing with him at the same time, I kind of feel like I couldn't really take advantage of that short 1 minute to win the battle. So I felt that I was defeated at the same time, because I did not have enough time, because I'm on the record. I don't want to have the record all like interpreters are arguing with me. It's arguing for the lawyer, but at the same time, I was also very happy that I actually have that power. So indirectly, he is acknowledging the power I have. Is that good?
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit, maybe something more specific, because I think in terms of Taiwanese and Chinese, right, and Mandarin, as we normalized as the Chinese, right? Any sorts of experiences that you've encountered.
So we're going to,
especially issues of trust, right?
yes, and actually we're going to talk about this. Is kind of a little bit sensitive to me. For me, I'm from Taiwan, and the rest of my crew are from China, and then often we joke about this. Sometimes, and so recently that I had I have actually noticed that some of my clients who I'm used to work with, and then some of the clients started to tell me, Patsy, can you send someone from mainland China? And then it's nothing personal. It's just you from Taiwan, and then I just want to make sure that someone from China probably would be better. And then in a way, I get it because I'm from Taiwan. Sometimes, I didn't grow up in China, so there are a lot of things that I didn't know, and I don't know. I would never know. But at the same time, the client actually tried to say, well, it has been a little bit tense recently between Taiwan and China. Even the order I'm using right here between Taiwan and China, meaning I put Taiwan first. And you all know, because it's just a conference interpreter, so I'm talking about something really sensitive, and even that, it's also an issue. So when I put, okay, so you say Taiwan and China, so that means you put Taiwan as the first priority over China. That addressed a problem. But again, well, I don't really see it that way. So I would say I would rather give the client a benefit of the doubt, because they would prefer having somebody who speak the Chinese term instead of a Taiwanese term. And also I had an experience, I had one time that I was interpreting for, I think that is the Air Force, not the Air Force, the airplane that I don't really remember, somewhere in Montreal. And then I was representing Canadian side, the delegates, and then the other side, they were Chinese delegates. And the moment I sat down, and the moment I opened my mouth, and immediately the delegates actually said, "You're from Taiwan?" I say, "Yes. However, I'm Canadian." Canadian side immediately say, "Yes, she's Canadian. She was born in Taiwan." And immediately Chinese delegates kind of like, "We don't feel like talking anymore." And of course, they would like to request for the replacement of an interpreter. And did I feel bad? Yeah, I did. I feel like shit, sorry. You know, I have to swear. I'm trying really hard not to swear, but that was my specialty. So I felt like shit, and then I felt defeated. But at the same time, I also felt powerless. That circles back to Julie's first question. And then did I have a voice? And then I do, and then I will. But again, in that situation, it was very difficult for me to say something. I gotta see that that's what's the situation. And then so at the end of the day, did I do the job? But I was really, really blessed that Canadians, I actually said, "No, we are having this interpreter. She is Canadian. Let's go through that." And I was like, yes. So we talk and we finish. Oh, but of course, naturally, down the road, like in the next time, they would prefer having somebody from China. And then that is actually perfectly fine with me, as long as they communicate with me in advance. But again, like I said, as an interpreter, we're professional interpreter, and then there are a lot of things that was beyond our control, and don't take it into your heart. I mean, it's nothing, it's really nothing personal. And then I think that's really the best way to address that. Am I okay?
Yeah. You think she's okay?
Yeah. Am I okay?
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, happy?
How about online ones? Am I okay?
All right. So Renee, I'm going to turn to you, Renee. You and I have had many conversations, you know, about the Canadian job market, you know, and Renee, I think you've been in Canada for less than 10 years, right?
10 years.
About 10 years,
Yeah,
okay.
for 10 years.
Okay, so just hitting 10 years. And, you know, we talked about, you know, institutional barriers that you face, you know, in terms of carving out your livelihood and making decisions about, you know, your career path. So outline for us how you have evolved, right? You've gone through, I think, several, you know, maybe, you know, not too many changes, but still several points of, you know, shifts. And then before you finally settled to become a medical interpreter that you are today. Particularly, I think we want to focus on what's gone on in the last 3 years, right? Yeah, so we'll do that. And then perhaps you know, if you could share 1 or 2 key points, you know, concerning workplace discrimination and, you know, that whole thing of, you know, you're there, but, you know, you're needed, but not needed at the same time, right? I think that's particularly interesting. Yeah.
Sure. So hello everyone, my name is Renee. I speak both Mandarin and Cantonese. That's 2 major languages that was spoken by the Chinese community. So I arrived in Canada 10 years ago. I came to Canada as an international student. I remember right after I graduated from the college, I wasn't able to get a job. My major in Toronto when I came to Canada, it was human resources, and it was really hard for me to get a job in the industry because I'm not Canadian. I'm not white. I don't speak like perfect English like the other person did in Canada. So it has been really struggling for me to get the job, to settle down, to get rooted in Canada, to start my own life, to start a new future. After probably I was working as a project coordinator in a nonprofit organization for probably 3 years. And then I got my permanent residence back in Canada. Right after I got my status in Canada, I started to think that now I've done the biggest part, the most challenging part is to settle down in Canada. So what's next? What should I do for myself? What do I really want to do? So although I have a background in human resources, I didn't end up being someone working in the industry. I figure out something else. I figure out that, oh, I speak both Mandarin and Cantonese, and there's a large population back in Canada that's gonna need someone to help them with. So I was thinking that maybe being an interpreter could be an option for me. So I researched online. Unfortunately, it was hard to find any useful information from the internet to learn about the likelihood and how to become an interpreter in Canada through Google. So what I could do, everything I could find online pretty much is about I need to take a program. So once I finish the program, I get a certificate, I'm accredited, so I have the credential to become an interpreter. Yeah, so that's where I started. I took a program for about a year, and after I finished the program, I took two different tests to be accredited as an interpreter, because I speak both Mandarin and Cantonese, and both languages need to be accredited as well. So there are many interpreters in Canada. They claim themselves they are trilingual interpreter. They speak both Mandarin, Cantonese, and English. However, that was not accredited at all. There are many people, they're gonna tell you, oh, I'm trilingual interpreter. My mother language is Cantonese, and I know Mandarin. However, they do not. It's not being accredited. So everyone, maybe it's hard for people who don't speak the language. They couldn't tell the differences. But for us, it's quite clear. So because my background I'm a little bit lost track. So I finished the program of the general training for interpreter. I took different tests to be accredited to work in the industry. Then I started to send out my resumes to different interpretation agencies. That's where I started. I started to work for different agencies. I went from places to places to get jobs done as an interpreter in 2 languages. It was really hard in the beginning because you don't really get enough jobs in the market. There are many other interpreters out in the market. We are competing for the same job, the same assignment at the same time. So it was really hard. And later on, I figured out it was really hard for me, just to make my life, make ends meet by working as an interpreter. So then I started to think maybe there's something else I should do. I need to do more. Then I started to think that maybe I should just advance myself to learn more about the industry, just to be more compatible. So when there are two interpreters out in the market, so the client gonna choose me other than the other interpreter. So that's how I thought. And I was really lucky that on my way working up to be a better interpreter, I met many great people like Pansy. That's how I met her. She later became my mentor. So I've learned a lot from her. So by the way, I don't know how to swear. So will. If you need someone who swears, please contact her. Okay. So then I would say that I've been working as an interpreter for about 7 years, but I'm still in the process of learning. I think learning is very important. Even we do speak the language, it's just not just enough. You are not you cannot be satisfied with what you already know, because there are many things you don't know. They're gonna come back to you when you are not able to interpret when you require so. So later on, because my background, I have a bachelor's degree in biotechnology back in China before I came to Canada. And since I came to Canada, I got my my certificate to work as an interpreter. So that's how I started to, and also because I speak both Mandarin and Cantonese. Then later on, I was contacted by one of the agency, and I was hired to work as an on-site interpreter in a hospital, like kind of like full-time. So in the hospital I work at, I offer both Mandarin and Cantonese interpretation to Asian patients who speak either of the languages. So I would say that the experience working as a medical interpreter is kind of, it's not really, it's nothing like a legal interpreter, a conference interpreter. It might have some common like some similarity with community interpreter, but that's not the same. Because in medical setting, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know the terminology, of course, and you need to know how to work with patient, the service provider, just to get things done. Like for example, I've been like for patients who speak different languages, like either Mandarin or Cantonese, I need to figure that out, and I need to offer the right language to them, because they're for service providers' sake, it's hard for them to tell whether an Asian speaker, whether they speak Mandarin or Cantonese. They would just tell you, oh, it's a Chinese patient, they need Chinese interpretation. So it's hard for the service provider to figure out what language they need. So it's my job to offer the right language, like authentic, right language to interpretation to the patient I serve. So Julie would like me to say something about my work working as a medical interpreter over the 3 years. I would say that although I was hired by the hospital, I offer free services to our patients, to our doctors, physicians, but I wasn't utilized as much as I was supposed to. Like I kind of have a feeling that our practitioners, our doctors or nurses, they are reluctant to use an interpreter, even though I'm free. I believe to them it's more like, oh, it's just, well, we don't need an interpreter. The patient doesn't just have someone who speaks some English. They just bring the family members. I will just treat them. That's it. So they don't think language is important for the patient to offer treatment. However, for a patient, it's just not the same, because it's sometimes really hard for a patient it's hard for them, for a limited English speaker, it's hard for them to express what they really need. And it's just very hard for even to them to know that they have the right to use an interpreter. I think that's really sad. Like the hospital, like the healthcare system didn't make that really clear to the patient. They have the right to use an interpreter. They eventually ended up visiting a doctor without knowing what was that. They went to the hospital. They go to the hospital, they get a diagnosis or they get treatment, but they do have no idea what they're doing there. If you ask them what do you think about the treatment plan, they will say, I don't know. I will just do whatever the doctor tells me to do. Most likely, they're going to tell you that they don't know what problem they're having. They don't know what the treatment is going to be like, but that's what they're going to. That's just pretty much the fact. That's how it is. So my role is to help facilitating communication between the two parties. I try my best to communicate the language through my interpretation. I try to make both parties to communicate, like to let the patient know what their problems really are, what they really need to do. And also, I'm also helping our patients to communicate to the service provider what they really need and what they don't know, what they want from the doctor. So I think that's a really important part of me, for a very important part of my work. Okay, it was too long.
Just one point, perhaps you could explain when you said that the doctors, you believe that the doctors don't utilize the service as much, right? Why do you think that is? And if given how important it is that, you know, this work that you just described, right? If you don't get called, you're not going to get to do it. Can you talk a little bit about how, you know, you tell me like days when you spend just waiting in the room and they don't call?
Yes, it was weird that the service provider, they are reluctant to use an interpreter. I think there are a few reasons behind that. Like, first of all, because it's really, the doctors are really busy. They try to see as many patients as they can within a limited time. So with the interpreter's interpretation, it actually doubled the time for seeing a patient. So they prefer not to use an interpreter. They prefer to just guess, oh, what's the problem? Just point it to me. They may be some doctors or physicians, they know some Chinese keywords. They would just use their Chinese to communicate to the patient. What's the problem with you? Tone, pain, tone. Pretty much every doctor knows that pain and relax. So they're gonna talk like that, right? Yeah, I think that's the biggest reason. And the second reason, I would say that it's sad that I don't think they really care about how the patients feel. Like they kind of know that the patient are there because they need treatment. They need some medical treatment from them, but they don't really have the time to talk to the patient to address what they really need, like maybe emotional, they need a social worker, or they just want to, they don't even get the choice to tell the doctor what plan they're gonna offer. And the other reason for the service provider not using interpreter is because I would say that it's a common misconception. The public just don't understand the role of an interpreter. They don't know why a trained interpreter is important. They probably just think like, oh, any bilingual speaker can be an interpreter. I would just tell the sentence, you just interpret. So why is it difficult? Just interpret it. Just interpret whatever word I just said to you. But that's just not the case. Like, each language has their own characters. It's unique languages. They're just not always use the equivalent translation, word from word. So they can, if you don't really speak both two different languages, it's really hard to understand for monolinguals to understand why is it difficult to perform interpretation. So it's actually not easy.
Okay, thank you. Great. All right, so moving along, Qibing. So we talked a lot over these months and really years about the nature of language, right? Which you consider yourself, and I certainly I believe you are a true linguist, almost an obsessive linguist.
I wish I could say so.
And of course around that is the struggle as an interpreter with recognition, with how others judge you, and ownership, as in how you're empowered by language, right? How you're able to own both languages, hopefully. And also this position, which is very rare. Qibing is the only, correct me if I'm wrong, right? Because maybe you haven't updated information for me, but he, as far as I know, is the only full-time Chinese staff interpreter in the Canadian court system in Toronto. Yeah.
Actually, I am one of three staff.
Oh, you're one of three. Okay.
Interpreters. Altogether, we have maybe like over 10 staff interpreters, including the very high in-demand languages such as Spanish, French.
Right. You have more in
a few other languages.
Right. Okay. But for three to serve the city, that's actually very few. Anyway, so if you could share a story or two by way of capturing some of the hardest topics that we discussed. For example, how accent, right, comes in, gets in the way as a liability for you, and also that, I love it, when you tell me that others in the court system, they hang around, they joke around, and then sometimes they say the interpreter is a necessary evil, right? So you could explain and flesh out those 2 points.
Absolutely, that's very frustrating. But first of all, before we begin, I think of this as kind of like a session, so it's fair to say I am the language addict. And I have been working as a staff interpreter, court interpreter for 8 years, over 8 years, and it's a financially, not that financially promising, but rewarding intellectually, and in terms of lots of ways, it's very rewarding and very satisfying for me, fascinating. I'm intrigued by languages interpretation. And in the process, I have learned a lot. It's a very eye-opening process for me. Before I started working as an interpreter, I was working in a corporate setting, glued to the screen for 8 hours per day, which I really, really hate. In the first half of my career, I was a translator, and the first few years I was in Canada, I couldn't get a job in the language industry, so I ended up working that kind of pathetic, what I consider to be pathetic corporate job. And before I got this opportunity to take the task of working in the court system, which I took, and it has been a happy period of 8 years, and I look forward to a very happy second half of my career, continuing to work as an interpreter. And speaking of the perils, and as Judy has mentioned, Judy has been very, very supportive, very, very important force in this program, in this project. And I initially, when I started to learn the language, I tried very hard to lose the accent. I listened to BBC, I listened to VOA, I listened to everyone, anybody who I consider to be speaking English as a first language, hopefully someone who's very close to the Queen of Britain. I hope I can mimic that kind of accent. And to no avail, as you can see, I still have some accents. I will probably always carry the accent with me. So initially I thought accent actually defines who you are. Now my opinion actually, especially over the past 3 years, thanks to Julie's project, has already changed. And because now I think accent doesn't define me. What I think defines me. People say, you are what you eat. Actually, I'm from Toronto. Food in Toronto, if I hate to admit, is horrible. If I were in New York, it's probably different. I am what I eat. I am what I think. I think we are what we think. When people think of language, they think of language in 2 ways. They divide language into written language and oral language. But for me, those 2 languages actually are visible language. There is another language, invisible language. In my opinion, that invisible language is thinking. So the fascinating question for me is, can we or can we not think without language? I wish I could pretend to be knowledgeable and draw a meaningful conclusion. I don't have a ready answer, but what I can say for now is at least language to a large extent, to an overwhelming extent, defines who we are. It shapes the way we think. So we are what we think. So it's the idea that we convey in our job, in the process of interpreting that matters. It's not how, what kind of accents we have, or to what extent we can minimize or lose the accents. That's one thing. And sorry, Julie, I kind of forgot about the second part.
It's the interpreter as the necessary evil, like your colleagues say that, right? Can you flesh out the dynamic of the whole status struggle and in the courtroom and stuff? Yeah.
Well, I hope it's not broadcast live online, so because I'm going to be mentioning some of my colleagues. Yeah, well, it's not necessarily my colleagues. I'm just mentioning some people. People actually have some kind of, I would consider to be bias or misconception about this job. They think of us as somebody who just happen to be able to interpret, because we happen to speak 2 languages, which unfortunately, I think everybody of us in this room can agree, it can't be further away from the truth. We actually come to the job with a lot of skills, we have a lot of knowledge, and I can give you one example. When I first started the job as a court interpreter, I already had worked as a translator for over 10 years. Still, I was very nervous, especially for the first year. I was always nervous. I'm still nervous now, but maybe not as often as I used to be. So when the first time I stepped into the courtroom, you know, in Canada, lawyers address each other as my friend. I was confused about this friend. I was confused why all of a sudden being so personal. Of course, it's a good tradition in Canada. People try to use that term to tone down the aggressiveness. And another occasion is one of the witnesses in a crime, in a criminal case, is an 8-year-old kid. The kid was asked to testify. So they try to use informal, they try to use simple language. Still, that poor kid, as I was when I first started as this horrible interpreter, inexperienced interpreter, was confused about the term "my friend." I would say any 8-year-old kid would be able to tell the meaning of a friend, except when the term "my friend" is used in that setting. So in that sense, how language is determined actually, is defined actually, is one of my ultimate questions. Some people would say, if it's your first language, of course, the definition of first language is tricky in the first place. If it's your first language, some people would say you understand. Some people would mistakenly believe you understand language 100%, which is actually absolutely not true. Nobody understands 100% of any language. Actually, if you ask me how much I understand English, most of the time I understand English, but it doesn't mean I understand 100% of the language. Probably I understand, my estimate is 3% of the language, because English has a vocabulary of maybe 1 million words. I don't think I know more than 30,000 of them. It's just most of the time I am in that 3% linguistic comfort zone. So most of the time we are in the zone, but occasionally, especially if we're working as interpreter, we lose the protection, we lose the luxury, the privilege of only talking about what we know we are talking about. We are challenged to talk about something that we don't know, which is one of the reasons why being able to speak two languages and being able to interpret are very different, because to interpret, you have to be able to talk about something that you may not feel comfortable talking about. So that's one of the things. In terms of social recognition, in terms of the status of interpreters, I would say for now it's still far from satisfactory, but it's very promising, because for me, we are, at least the general public, is in the linguistic dark age. They are very ignorant when it comes to language. I'm not saying they're stupid. Smart people can be ignorant. So as long as, well, maybe it's not as long as, it takes time to educate the general public. It takes time to make our clients understand and appreciate what it takes to interpret properly. So when that day comes, there is light at the end of the end of the tunnel. Everybody who speaks only one language has a tunnel vision when it comes to perceiving the reality, and the light at the end of the tunnel is the Hunter College program, other programs.
Wow. So you see how much I paid him, right?
So I'm not telling.
I did not get my cut.
All right, thank you, Jimmy. Thank you. So now, okay, Li Hua. Even though we don't explicitly say so, I think in many ways, right, our talk has revolved around the geopolitics, of our time. Particularly, with relations between China and Canada being a key factor. Since you're a conference interpreter, it impacts your work directly. So for this audience this evening, can you give us a glimpse of how world affairs have impacted your life, both socially and professionally? As a conference interpreter, and perhaps how your perspectives may have changed through this project in recent years.
So first I should say, because most of the time I work as an interpreter and I don't have my own voice, I simply interpret what the other people talk about. So sometimes when I have to think about my role here, I need to, now this is my time to have my voice heard. For conference interpreters, and particularly, I think everyone has been realizing that China has kind of changed its position in the world. So of course, as conference interpreters, we I cannot say we are the first one, but maybe we are the group that can feel this kind of attitude change. For example, I should say for conference interpreters, mainly we provide interpreting from three perspectives. One is for academic, seminars or those kind of academic exchange of ideas. And secondly, for those kind of business negotiations. And third, of course, that's like UN setting, that's the political field. So if I can just give you an example, when I started to work in Canada, I feel the conference market for Chinese and English is not as big as the one we have in China, because in China, almost every language, even including like French or those German speakers, they might use English when they do business or they have some academic exchanges in China. So for Chinese English interpreters, when I was in China, I had a lot of job opportunities. At the time, I was a full-time lecturer in the university and a part-time conference interpreter in the market. I once told Julie at that time, the conferences I refuse to take are more than the conferences I can take, because you have so many opportunities. You can choose which client to work with, you can choose your partner, and you can choose which city to work for. So a very good old days for me. Okay, but after I moved to Canada, maybe compared with English and French interpreters, the market is much better for French-speaking interpreters in Canada, but for Chinese and English, it's not that big. Well, I'm trying. I have been working to expand my market, and suddenly I think that was the year when, just give you one example. So after Trudeau just became the Premier of Canada, it seems the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang paid a visit to Canada. So at the time, we interpreters were very excited because it has been more than 10 years since the Chinese Premier had such kind of this level official visit in Canada. And we felt that compared with conservatives, the liberals, they have a much more positive views towards establishing relations with China. So we were very excited and we felt we have booming economic exchanges, and it seems the political exchanges are also getting more and more interpreters involved. However, so in the year when Huawei, I think if you are sensitive to the Chinese issue, like Meng Wanzhou, when she was arrested in Vancouver, and immediately, so we can just feel, because at the time I worked as an interpreter for the Translation Bureau of the federal government of Canada. For that 1 year after the Meng Wanzhou affairs, I had no contracts with the Translation Bureau at all. So no conferences. And also I used to work for those kind of academic seminars, like for Toronto University. A lot of Chinese officials, they would just pay a visit to Toronto, and then there would be some trainings and some seminars. But after Meng Wanzhou event for the Rotman School, no delegation from China for that year. So that's the economic. I mean, this kind of issues is kind of political issues. And then the next year, because Rotman School informed us, be prepared. We are going to have an explosive growth of trainings this year, because after Meng Wanzhou affair, it seems everything is gradually getting better. And then we had COVID. So finally, for some trainings organized by Rotman School, it shifted online. Well, once that kind of training shifted into online program, it was not that attractive. So this kind of market is shrinking. This time we felt this is kind of economic, because of the economic impact, and including the current zero COVID policy in China. So investors in China were kind of withdrawing. They are withdrawing from the Chinese market. And also my friend in working in the United Nations, they also told me because currently the leaders from China is getting kind of very aggressive, or sometimes they, I don't know how to explain that, but sometimes when I was working for the UN conferences, the most, for Chinese interpreters, once you have to work from Chinese into English, that's the moment when that you feel really nervous because all the other interpreters are waiting for your relay. I think that's the same pressure that can be felt by Arabic interpreters because these two booths, I mean Chinese and Arabic, we are the only interpreters that need to work into two languages. So you need to work into Chinese and also you need to work into English. So working into Chinese, you only have the Chinese delegation listening to you. But when you work into English, all the other interpreters, Spanish, French, and Russian, they will listen to your relay. And of course, Chinese delegation, they will also monitor your language. I think just now, as you mentioned about Taiwan issue, that's a very, very sensitive issue. You must listen carefully. Is that a country or a province? So if the delegate mentioned it's a province, no problem. If the delegate mentioned is a country, for example, we have several countries like, and then the final one, they mentioned Taiwan. Then because this is a very sensitive moment, if you made this mistake, I mean, the speaker did not make the mistake, but you make the mistake, and then you will be in trouble, big trouble. So, so that's what I want to mention. The UN interpreters, Chinese interpreters, because Chinese delegation are, you know, making more and more. I cannot find the right word for that, but you must be really careful. Like once something takes place, we once discussed, should we use the word protest or criticize or condemn? This cannot be changed. You cannot say, I feel I should use criticize. No, Chinese delegation will let you know which word to use. If you use the wrong one, that's not enough, or that's too much. I want to just give you one example, like when the Huawei issue was taking place. So the Chinese embassy in Toronto, they had a kind of press release. So in this press conference, a journalist just raised a question as, will there be any repercussions if Canada adopts such kind of policies? And then, so later, when the Chinese ambassador answered this question, so the answer is like kind of course, there will be consequences. However, the interpreter at the time, she was using the same word used by the journalist, repercussion. So after the word has been used, and a lot of people feel that China is about to retaliate, take a revenge against Canada or all the other countries who are going to use similar policies. So finally, I mean, they have to explain, this is not the word they want to use. They want to use consequence, not repercussion. So I just want to use this example to let you know that for conference interpreting, it's a little bit different from community interpreting. Neither one is easy. And also the political issues, the economic issues, all those kind of changes will seriously, you know, just affect what the interpreters will perform. Particularly at this kind of critical moment, you will be more nervous. I asked my friend in UN, and she told me, although she has been working there for more than 20 years, and nowadays, every day for her is a nightmare.
Wow. Okay. All right, so on that note, I think, we don't have a lot of time, but, I just wanted to kind of throw it open so that we can all end on the brighter side. So let's return to purpose and prosperity, right? So if, you guys want to share anything in terms of your triumph, in terms of, navigating the structural constraints and challenges, and or in terms of perhaps how we raise the stature of interpreters in general, and perhaps particularly community interpreting, right? Any stories you want to share? Anyone, please jump in. Or should I? All right, Bing. Nilay.
In terms of raising the stature and improving the social recognition, professional recognition of interpreters, I would say some kind of academic research, linguistic research accuracy is very important. Linguistics actually is a relatively new field, new discipline. It's only started to be developed in the last century, I think, if I remember correctly. So our understanding of language is still very, very, very limited, very superficial. So, well, when I was enrolled in the program, one of the courses that benefits me the most was the comparison between English and the Chinese language. It focuses on the sentence structure and syntax and the grammatical differences. However, it also gives me a feeling why Mandarin speakers, they tend to think in a way that's very different from English speakers. Like, say, for instance, he is a heavy smoker. It's a typical English sentence. Mandarin speakers prefers to use a verb instead of a noun. He smokes heavily. So that kind of difference makes you wonder, is it true that Mandarin speakers, when they think of the action, they think of it as some kind of deed or action that's imposed on the world, while English speakers tend to think of the thing as a kind of existence. Like, he is a heavy smoker. The car is a very aggressive consumer of gas. No, we have to say the car consumes a lot of gas. So that these kind of differences are intriguing, and also some kind of linguistic difference, linguistic discoveries that have been developed or made in the past century, like linguistic determinism, that language determines the way we think, or linguistic relativity, language shapes the way we think. So I'm particularly intrigued in that. Unfortunately, I'm not a very good student, at least not in the traditional sense. When I was in the program, I skipped a lot of the linguistic courses or classes, which looking back is a big regret, because if you miss it, you miss it. So I think in that sense, some kind of academic research will be able to open the mind, open the eyes of people, to enlighten people. We need that kind of enlightenment.
Okay, all right. Maybe we have time for one more, some story about your triumph. Come on, Pansy, you go.
When it comes to community interpreting, I would say every day.
Right.
Every day when I finish my assignment, I feel great. I feel I don't know, I feel like that kind of a satisfaction is something that money cannot buy. First, I felt that I helped the person, and in a way, earlier, who was our first panelist for the court interpreter, I guess she mentioned, is that Christine, right? Yeah, Christine. Christine mentioned that, she shows sympathy by providing the language from the language perspective. And then I think that is also part of, I would say, the triumph. I feel great. And then secondly, I feel like when I have that privilege to be the voice of the person, no matter if it was the English speaker or non-English speaker, and then I feel like I have that privilege to be part of their life, at least for that some certain moment. And then I was able to do that for them. And that's the good part. And then also thirdly, when I interpret, I'm pretty much possessed. I become the person. And then not necessarily just like what they say, I'm biased or anything. However, I really become the person. The tone, the swear words. I just cannot get away from that. The tone, everything, and I feel that is really the highlight of my day. Therefore, when you ask me, do I have that every day? Is that good?
Yes, yes.
And of course, you have to study.
Right, I will also second that, you know, and that little discussion, you know, that we had was really interesting, just now about the extent to which, you know, empathy could, perhaps get in the way or support, you know, the delivery of interpreting. My own experience actually aligns with, Pensy in that, there's a sense in which you can be in a third dimension of flow in taking on the voice fully of whoever you're interpreting for, you know, giving the full flesh of the message without actually necessarily affecting yourself. And that is part of the craft, right? That's something that is specific to the craft of interpreting. And in fact, it helps you. And there's a sense in which as you attain that flow, that it is actually less draining. You're able to keep that as a separate dimension. And then when you're done, you're out of that. So, you know, and I also want to share that by way of, you know, just information. I think it's interesting because a lot of us here, we think of ATA and we think of the credentialing around ATA certification and all that as, of course, you know, what we have. Over here, who we have here, Pensy, she's actually the president of the ATIO, and you know, it says something about, again, the triumph of community interpreting, right? You want to,
Yes.
yeah, and what has happened, you know, in terms of the credentialing of community interpreting.
I would say that community interpreters have been really forgotten for a long time. And then I would say community living, everything. We are in the community. Although Li-Hua is a conference interpreter, Bing is a court interpreter, Renee is medical, and I do all of it. And then I know I'm not fit for a conference because, you know, political issues, by the time I open my mouth or the way how I say things, I would say I will not end up good. That I know. And then on top of it, I like to get out there. So community interpreting, I would say it's very, very difficult. Try to think about using those day-to-day words. Yesterday we had a good discussion, get to your skin and in your skin or something like that. And we were like trying to figure out how do we exactly say that in Chinese, in Mandarin. And it's actually quite difficult. And a lot of time we take it for granted. In English, oh yeah, I get it, I understand that. But when it comes to interpreting that into the target language, here in this case within Mandarin, sometimes it can be hard. And I also speak Taiwanese, and sometimes it can be hard. You all of a sudden you got stuck. And so I think the community interpreters have been already forgotten for a long time. Everybody would say, well, you speak the language, come here, you know, just ask him, do this and do that. It's really easy. And Renee can echo that, especially in a hospital, also even in court. Sometimes client would say it's really not a big deal, but it is a big deal. So for ATIO, Association of Translators and Interpreters of Ontario, yes, I've been very, very lucky that I got elected as the president, and this year is our 100-year-old. And I would also have to say, this is actually, I'm the very first one, female Chinese, for the president, for this position. And I've been really, really privileged to learn so much from the, how I said it, running the association. And then I do think the future of the community interpreters is rising. And for community interpreters, a lot of time that I believe the mentioned earlier offsite, like earlier saying, well, I think the community interpreter doesn't really make too much money. Let's talk about the money part. Doesn't make a lot of money. Yes, correct. However, when you do the job right, get the things done right, you will be rewarded. And I would say, I don't think I'm a big fan loser. I don't think so, but I started as working as a community interpreter. I got paid for $25 per hour Canadian. But now I climbed up and then I improved my skills and then I do a lot of things that I could do to improve, to better myself, skills, and then of course, knowledge. And just yesterday, one of my clients asked me, hey, Pansy, how do I join your association? Because I want to better my English. I laughed and I said, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm not to be offensive, but in order to join our association first, you have to be good in both languages. You're not here to learn the language. It's not about that. And I'm not insulting you, but I'm just a very straightforward person. I don't want to waste your time. And then also at the same time, I would say, yes, ATA, ATIO, we all get the certification exam pass, and then I got certified. ATIO is actually in Ontario. It is actually illegal. We have this title certified. You can only use the word certified, interpreter, certified, translators, both directions. And also a lot of titles, and for him that you have to pass the exam and get your credentials done. Collect them, of course. I use the word collect them, but it's a cruel world. You have to. Right?
Okay, yeah, right. Thank you so much. I think we've run out of time, so we're gonna skip the question part, maybe towards the end, we can get to the questions, and then we have the third panel. Thank you. Thanks for listening. All right, Anna.
Thank you so much. All right, so let's start with the faculty panel. I'm very honored to be moderating today. And since we are starting a bit late, I won't give a long introduction, but our topic today is interpreting in a post-COVID era. So kind of building on what our previous panel was talking about, navigating the changes that have been happening in the interpreting world over the last couple of years. So with us today, we're very happy to have Ms. Elena Langdon, and I'll remind the audience that there is more information and some contact details available on our Hunter Translation Society website. But for a very brief introduction, Ms. Elena Langdon is an ATA certified translator and a conference and community interpreter, as well as an instructor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And Professor Anatoly Samachornov is a U.S. Department of State contract conference interpreter. He is also a United States federal court interpreter, a translator, and an editor. Professor Maggie Holm, who is online with us today, is a faculty member both at Hunter and at Middlebury Institute. She is also a United States State Department contract interpreter, as well as a federal and state certified court interpreter. And of course, Professor Maristela Verastegi is a federally certified court interpreter, freelance conference interpreter, as well as a scholar of medieval Iberian law and literature, which is absolutely fascinating. Maybe we'll get to talk about it today. Let's see. Yes, so of course, interpreters really operate at the confluence, the intersection of many different language groups and cultures. And, every country in the world, almost every culture in the world has been deeply affected by COVID, by the COVID recovery, and in one way or another by the events occurring in Ukraine. So my question to our panelists, my first question, looking back on the past 2 years on everything that's happened, what kind of impact has COVID and or the war in Ukraine had on your personal interpreting practice and career? What changes have you gone through? And to start us off, maybe I'll ask Ms. Langdon.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. So definitely, it had a big impact on me as it's had on everyone. Luckily, before the pandemic hit, I had started a small business with 2 colleagues
to focus on remote interpreting, specifically remote simultaneous interpreting. And so we were a little bit more ready than a lot of other interpreters. I think we had started the business about a year and a half before we were getting started and looking for clients. And we had the equipment, we knew what we needed to have if we didn't have it all. So COVID, the pandemic really accelerated it. And all of a sudden, it just became really real and we had to have it all. And we were able to pivot very quickly and actually start training people and giving guidance to other interpreters on what they could do to do remote simultaneous interpreting. It also changed the nature of the work that I was doing with clients. And the positive way it changed it was that some of them had a lot more work because now they didn't have to have the interpreters go in personally. And they also didn't have to have their, the people participating in the meeting go in personally. So they actually had a lot more interpreted events. So one of the clients that I have is a large nonprofit that works with different people in all kinds of different countries, and they would have a couple of meetings with their staff a year. And now they have, I want to say 8 or 10 regular meetings and check-ins that they can do with interpreters. And even the structure of their organization has changed. And I'm not saying that's because of interpreting, even necessarily because of the pandemic, but they were able to give a lot more, center the work that the people were doing in other countries a lot more and kind of withdraw as the leaders, being that they were based in the US and the countries that they work with are all, most of them are in Africa. And they were able to center them and so have meetings that were all in Portuguese or in French, while it was the English speakers who needed the interpreters and had to rely on interpreters. So it's been an interesting dynamic in that sense. There were, we were able to respond quickly, but there was still a lot that we learned. And I just jotted down a few things in terms of thinking. We were not able to control as much as we wanted to be able to control. So it was still about finding clients as a small business and dealing with the reality that the bigger companies and corporations were very quick to catch up and had all the marketing and the money and the power behind them that they usually have. So we weren't able to just suddenly take over that and still had to keep focusing on clients that made sense for us. And also finding other interpreters that could do that kind of work took more work than we thought. A lot of interpreters who were very, very good, very skilled, just technologically didn't have the equipment, didn't have the know-how, and some of them didn't have the flexibility. There was a lot of resistance too. And a lot of hype around remote simultaneous interpreting created by big companies, and then a lot of fear on behalf of interpreters, and then anger too was another thing that I learned. A lot of interpreters got angry about what was happening and having to pivot. So I think for the experience with that those are the main things. It was a lot of changes, and well, I'll talk about the other part later. So that's it.
All right, thank you. Yes, Professor Samachorna, what is your take on the question?
I think it was a disaster. It was a horrible and mitigated disaster. I was not prepared for remote interpreting. I've never done this before prior to 2 years ago. My language pairs are Russian, English, English-Russian. The market has been shrinking since the first round of sanctions in 2014. The twin impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine, and first and foremost, I mean, we have to acknowledge that this is the Ukrainians who are suffering and are being under shell, under fire, and all the horrors that are happening there. So the plight of interpreters is really not that important. But basically, the previous panel was talking about the impact of global events on personal lives. The global events, Mr. Putin literally went out and destroyed my business because my practice was financial interpreting here in New York. It's also, not to be a complete pessimist, I think it presented an opportunity to learn how to do remote interpreting. It also presented an opportunity to do training. It also presented an opportunity to look at your kind of craft, to have time to analyze what you're doing right, what you maybe need to work on. And I think, we were fortunate that the State Department did a series of training, kind of pulling the interpreters' resources together. And we had a chance to communicate for the first time as a group. And that was a very interesting exercise because that is a lot of languages brought together and a lot of different perspectives that we not necessarily hear all the time. So that perhaps was a positive thing, but in general, I think one of the things that happened with COVID and remote interpreting is very severe economic pressure, because the client is now telling you, well, you don't have to travel, so we are offering you maybe 50% of your previous fee. As we all know, the current inflationary pressures make that proposition almost untenable. So I think that we are still, it's too early to really come to conclusions about that. I think we're still in the process. The situation is very dynamic. It's still developing. I think that remote interpreting, of course, is here to stay, but I think the impact on our profession, I think, is going to be felt for a very, very little time, and we have changed whether we wanted it or not, and we're going to change some more.
Thank you. Professor Rastegui, what do you think about this?
Well, I agree with all of the preceding remarks. I have a full-time job and then I have my freelance gigs, right? Freelance gigs disappeared, right? For the first good year and a half of the pandemic, the things that made my life as an interpreter interesting and happy disappeared. My gigs at the UN, my gigs at the occasional remote assignment was offered, but of course, at prices that were no longer the prices that we were used to before the pandemic. And because I kept a full-time job, for which I felt extremely grateful, my full-time job as a staff interpreter in the Eastern District of New York, the Federal Courthouse in Brooklyn, I felt it was my duty to not participate in the lowering of the fees for all my freelance colleagues. So I literally rejected all the work that came my way because I didn't want to be responsible for cheapening the market. The market got cheapened anyway, but at least I don't feel as guilty about it. It was difficult also in the courthouse for the federal courts in general. The sudden switch to Zoom interpreting literally was traumatic because different from other jurisdictions, the federal courts have been very reluctant to get into video remote interpreting. There was some local non-online versions of video conferencing allowed from federal jails, but that was very little used in extenuating circumstances. And all of a sudden, here we are, right? First using AT&T teleconferencing, like all sorts of terrible, disastrous ways of approaching hearings that sometimes lasted 3 or 4 hours and brought up issues of ethics, of burnout, of just interpreter fatigue. All sorts of really bad issues started to come out of these unexpected situations for which we were absolutely not prepared. However, the positive thing was that the shock forced, especially most of the old timers, and there's a lot of old timers in the federal courts, because it takes a long time to get there for whoever it is, interpreters, judges, lawyers, everybody, bureaucrats, everybody takes a long time to get there. So by the time they get there, the resistance to technology was big, continues to be big, but now at least there's kind of a resignation to it, right? It's here, might as well use it. But as soon as they were able to go back to in-person, everything's like 90% back to in-person, right? So I'm not sure I'm really happy about that. We need to embrace it. Of course, not for entire trials. I don't think we can have 5-month federal trials through Zoom. I think ethically that would present a lot of problems, but I do think that for shorter things, interviews, people who are for some reason or another having problems being transported from the jails and other facilities into the courthouses, it presents an alternative to be able, or to, for example, supply our newly created demand for Ukrainian interpreters with a background in Russian slang. That is the last request that I received from chambers for one judge was a Ukrainian interpreter with a good knowledge of the Russian slang spoken in the villages, if I remember well, in the southern part of Ukraine, I don't know, some bordering zone of Ukraine, which I was like, okay, I'll get you somebody who speaks Russian and Ukrainian. I can't promise what villages they've been to. That kind of thing became a reality. I mean, like 3 years ago, nobody would have called our office requesting that. And now they are requesting that, and it's a valid need. I don't know if we can actually meet it, but these are the changes, the sudden changes that came from that combination of circumstances. And my district, different from the southern district, the more famous district in downtown Manhattan, my district has the most ports of entry. We have the airports, we have maritime ports of entry, we have railway ports of entry, we have a lot of things coming in and out. So the amount of languages that we manage in the office, our list of freelancers is humongous. And of course, many people, because all of a sudden there was no work, started moving on to other things, trying to make a living. All of a sudden, a lot of people that were this close to retirement decided, okay, I'm done. This is just not working, and retired. And now we are facing an incredible shortage. There was already starting to be a critical shortage of interpreters before the pandemic because of other reasons. I think one of them that people miscalculated, and they really thought by now C3PO would be sitting right by me interpreting in 100 languages. Artificial intelligence was supposed to have already taken over our profession, and it hasn't, right? And a lot of people just kind of verged out of the profession, thinking it was no longer going to be a profession. And I'm sure one day the artificial intelligence version of me will be the one doing this, but we're not there yet. And we need interpreters. So it is definitely a huge impact. I think that moving forward in the next 2 or 3 years, while all of you students who graduate, get fairly certified and go work for me, we're going to continue suffering a lot, because we do face a real shortage and also a general disappointment and disenchantment of many very qualified and good interpreters that kind of strayed away from the profession, frustrated by the circumstances created by the pandemic.
Thank you so much. And of course, Professor Hong, who is with us online, what do you think about this?
Hi, everyone. So for me, the pandemic basically changed my interpreting career in 3 aspects. The first one is, of course, switching from on-site to remote. So I was actually pretty lucky because I learned to use Interprefy in 2017 and began to learn to use Kudo in 2018. And even before the pandemic, about in 2018 and 2019, I logged about 20 days of remote work annually, but usually I work exclusively from the hub office, not from my home office. However, when the pandemic hit, there's basically no choice. For 2 years, I work remotely exclusively. Until this year, I begin to have a few on-site assignments, but I still work remotely most of the time. So I was quite lucky because before the pandemic, during my limited experience in working remotely, I already learned some pitfalls in dealing with the clients who are trying to reduce my rate because I'm working remotely. So I had some experience dealing with that. So from the very beginning of working remotely in the pandemic, I've been very firm about my rate. Like for conference interpreters, we usually charge 4-day rate or half-day rate, and I wouldn't waver on that. And because of that, I lose some clients. But it turns out that I should have got rid of those clients long ago, because the limited good clients that values quality and stayed with me, they actually provide me enough opportunities to sustain during the pandemic. And of course, another important thing is to diversify my portfolio during the pandemic. So that actually accelerates the process for me to realize that every assignment you take is an opportunity cost. So you should only accept the clients that are really worth it. So the second thing is, because of the pandemic, I was pushed to diversify my surfaced portfolio. Before the pandemic, I'm almost working exclusively as a conference interpreter, even though I'm certified in court and also certified in medical interpreting. But before the pandemic, 95% of my work are conference interpreting. But during the pandemic, because there's less conference, especially on-site conference. So to make up for the lost income, I took on other gigs as well. So right now, about 70% of my work are conference interpreting, 20% are translation, and 10% are teaching and court interpreting. So actually, after the diversification of my portfolio, I was quite lucky and was doing quite well during the pandemic. The first year of the pandemic, I maintained the same income level as pre-pandemic. And the second year, I actually made more than before the pandemic. And not even counting that, I gave birth to a baby during the pandemic. So I think I was quite lucky during the pandemic. And a lot of times remote, everything going virtual also make a lot of things possible for me, especially for my teaching job at Hunter College and at Montreal Institute, because I live in the Midwest. I live in Chicago, and I always wanted to teach, but it would take a lot for me to just give up everything here and move to California or move to New York. But because of everything going virtual, it becomes possible for me to teach remotely. And I absolutely love teaching. And last but not least, I think during the pandemic, because everything goes virtual, there's more continuing education opportunities for me as well. Because before the pandemic, for my work, I have to travel. Sometimes travel 3 weeks at a time or 2 weeks at a time. And it's really difficult to find a conference that doesn't collide with my work schedule. Or it is very difficult to tell my family that after I'm already gone for 3 weeks, I need to take another week to attend interpreting conference. So right now, because everything's online, so I can interpret in the morning and attend a continuing education conference in the afternoon, or work during the weekday and attend the conference virtually on weekends. So this definitely enable me to attend more industry-related conferences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. So our panelists have spoken a lot about the economic realities, the logistical and pragmatic realities that they faced during the past few years. And that leads me to my next question, a bit of a two-part question. So what are the most pressing challenges and the most exciting opportunities that professional interpreters are facing today? And perhaps also, what would be your advice for someone starting out as an interpreter right now? And I'll go in a slightly different order this time. I'll ask maybe Professor Verastegui. Would you be able to start? What do you think?
If I can turn this on. Yes, thank you. Well, challenges, I would say right now, the market. The market suffered, not only the work, like the fees lowered because of a lot of, in part, a lot of unfair practices from clients who took advantage of the shutdown to start demanding lower prices, forcing the agencies and other employers to also try to look for lower prices from contractors. But also in general, there was a trend to trying to cheapen our labor even before the pandemic, and the pandemic, I guess, just accelerated it. And I think the challenge is how to get our profession back where it deserves to be, because it takes a long time to get to do what we do. It takes a lot of investment, not only in money to pay for studying, and in personal time, in sacrifices of all sorts, and that has a value. And we need to fight to maintain that value. And that, I think, is a big challenge for newcomers to the profession. Opportunities, I think incredible opportunities, because different from before, the blossoming of the virtual interpreter market has opened a lot of doors, for example, for people to get into conference interpreting that weren't there before. It was much harder to get into conference interpreting, especially in a city like New York. Before that, you had to know somebody who knew somebody who got you into your first conference, and then your friend from AIC who started counting your hours to see if he could sponsor you, and you could be, it was hard. You had to like find somebody to open the door for you. And now that has slightly shifted with the advent of the technology and the wider use of the technology, especially things like Zoom simultaneous interpretation. Now you don't need to buy Interprefy to facilitate simultaneous in a conference. And that is a game changer. And I think that's a big opportunity that people need to take advantage of, become familiar and become proficient in those platforms, and take full advantage of your online skills to go and register with every agency on the face of the earth. Doesn't matter where they're located. Because I think this is a great opportunity for expanding your own skills and your clientele. Advice that I would give to some advice I've been trying to give my students. This is my first semester teaching interpreting, so it's kind of like a steep learning curve for me. But what I try to encourage is don't forget about the ethics. The ethics are the groundwork. They are the foundation of our profession. And sometimes it's easy with all this detachment and this distance provided by the pandemic and the virtual work to forget that they are still the bedrock of our profession. We do what we do at the level we do it because of the meticulous following of those ethics and professional standards, in whichever way we choose to practice them, but they have to be there. And that's what I try to instill in the people that I mentor, in my students. And that's the advice I give to everybody, no matter which area of the business, or in as many as you can, get familiar with the ethical and professional standards, make them the foundation of everything that you do.
Thank you so much. Professor Samachornov, what are your thoughts on this?
I have actually quite a lot, because I think if we look at the big picture, the macro picture, the previous panel really touched upon this. We need to establish our profession in this country. Certification is one way, our program is another way, but also I think I'm very happy to hear that you fought against the market, and law side did the same thing. Maybe we can imagine a union one day that will be negotiating collectively for us about working conditions, wages, cancellations. That's a dream. So while we are fighting this battle, I think on a personal level, diversification, as my previous colleague, Professor Hong, was doing, I also would think that you need to start looking at the areas that kind of are around interpreting and translating. And even though we're talking about interpreting, but if you're a translator, you do need to look at localization, you do need to look at project management, you do need to understand that products that you're going to translate for games, apps, all those things, they require a completely different approach, and you need to prepare yourself for that. Because there you're going to be part of the team, you need to contribute to that team, and you need to speak that language if you want to do that. So I think that I see as a growth sector. I think it's also incredibly challenging for an old timer like me to do. But if I were starting out, I would definitely look at what I can do interpreting / another profession. Because I do think that AI and machine translation, even machine interpreting is coming. I see in my personal experience that a lot of people are requiring editing rather than translation nowadays for specific texts. So this is already here, this is already happening. So that's what you need to prepare yourself for. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Langdon, what do you think?
I agree with everything that's been said. The lack of standards, the lack of understanding, the lack of unity among interpreters and between interpreters and the public, the clients, not to mention, yes, the agencies and the big companies is a real problem. And it's been like that in translation, and it's been like that in interpreting, and it definitely got accelerated by the pandemic. And there's the market is so fractured, or the field is so fractured, right? So interpreters who work in community settings, even that, like how do we define community? Those medical communities, legal community, those versus conference interpreters versus diplomatic interpreters. There's so much, there has been in the past, I think, just a real lack of unity and coming together and seeing, and of course, no one's fault, but just really not recognizing all that we have in common and how we can be stronger, if we do come together. And like my colleagues have mentioned, this idea of the market setting things and feeling kind of powerless. We say no to it, we set our own fees and say, yes, like you've mentioned, saying no to a lot of jobs. And it's got a lot easier. I spent a lot less time thinking about it. It's like, no. But I think just remembering that, and I've heard other people say, well, there's nothing I can do about it. Unlike what we've been saying today, there's nothing I can do about it because the market is setting it, and just remembering that the market is us. So if interpreters, in fact, were more unified in whatever way, and just not saying we're going to work for an hour, in any kind of setting, it's never been that the hour is the minimum, much less something that requires preparation and training and credentials, then we can change that market, because we are the market. If they can't find interpreters who are any good, because yes, a lot of people have flooded especially conference interpreting, because it's more accessible, and a lot of them just don't have they don't have the skills yet. They can't do it very well. Now, on the good side, I think there are a lot of opportunities, including everything that was said before, and also just a recognition that there's an increased access for a lot of people that didn't have a voice before. I've worked with a lot of Indigenous activists, a lot of filmmakers, just people who usually aren't traveling, or just made it a lot easier for them to be heard, and a much bigger platform for them to be heard, because of the interpreting was available, and so they could speak from their village in the Amazon and have an interpreter there. I think that interpreters have become more visible with the conflict in Ukraine, with the horrible examples of bad interpreting. I feel like people are starting to recognize or just see us more. I've heard more of the word interpreter versus translator in the media. And the third thing that I was thinking about is it does give interpreters geographic freedom. If you want, you can go work in a different place. You don't have to work in New York City anymore necessarily, or DC. It's not, of course, that romantic dream of being a nomad and traveling in your RV while you're interpreting. That's not really going to work. But I mean, I guess it could, but you'd have to have a really good satellite internet. But I stayed much longer in Brazil than I usually do in 2021, and I got good internet. I got backup power because in Brazil power goes out all the time. And I had a private setting, and in addition to the things I already had, my computer, my microphone, I was able to work there and live, and where I grew up. So those are some of the good things.
Thank you so much. Yes, and Professor Hong, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree with what the three professors have already mentioned. And I think the challenge is, one is a work condition and outsourcing of jobs, because sometimes in the US market, we wouldn't accept some work conditions, wouldn't accept some rate, but then they just outsource it to other markets while other people will accept it. So that certainly is an issue. And also work condition, their study proven that interpreting remotely, actually you get fatigue faster than if you work on site, and there's higher risk of acoustic shock. So all of those things are worth looking into, and because that will not only impact our health, but also impact our career as a whole. So that's something that we need to look into and eventually deal with. And for opportunities, I do agree that because of the introduction of remote working, it brings some opportunities and break the geographic barriers. As for me, and a Mandarin interpreter in Midwest, for Mandarin interpreters, we usually joke about it, saying that Midwest is the desert of Chinese interpreting or Mandarin interpreting, because most of the jobs are concentrated on the West Coast or East Coast. And during the pandemic, before the pandemic in Chicago, I basically, if I work local, I can only get assignments related to agriculture or finance or something like that. But during the pandemic, I can interpret for conferences in the tech industry and other industries. So that definitely brings some opportunities. And the other thing is, I think another advantage is because of everything going remotely, we have more opportunity to further our education and to acquire new skills, which eventually will be very helpful. Like one of the professors just mentioned, in the future, probably it will be good for our career to diversify and have interpreting plus something else, not just the interpreting. In the past, we always focus on specialization, but I think specialization is still important, but being able to acquire more skills and have more to offer will also be an advantage in the post-COVID world.
I see, thank you so much. So now I'd like to open up the floor to the listeners and the audience. Are there any questions for our panelists? We have about 7 minutes, so actually we could get a good question in, I think.
Hi, I have a question for Professor Elena. So you just said the interpreters are not like unified enough. I just wonder why. Is it because the people who
do the translation and interpreting in this industry much less than other job related to language services or something else? What do you mean by much less? Yeah, because I know for the language teachers, you can see a lot of them around you, and you can easily find them. But as a student, I do not see many interpreters or translators in reality. So yeah, and you just said they're not unified, and I agree because I didn't hear much about them. So I don't just want to know why.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think there aren't standards. There's no. I mean, there are standards. I shouldn't say that. There are standards, but there's different standards for each field. There's not an understanding that there are standards. There's very little recognition of it as a profession, and I think that contributes to. There are a lot of practitioners, a lot of very good practitioners, a lot of very good interpreters who are not part of a professional association, who are not part of anything else that would ground them in that, who didn't have formal training. And again, very skilled, there are a lot of people came up without training. It's changed. All of you people now have to go through training. A master's is really the best way. But I think that contributes to a lot of it. Just there's a lot of, and there's no requirement. I mean, in many ways you don't have to be certified in most settings. In federal court you do, but in a lot of other settings you don't, including a lot of lower courts. In hospitals there is certification, but it's not required. And Title VI is an unfunded mandate, so language access, there's no funding for it. Hospitals have to really scramble. How are they going to pay for the interpreters? And capitalism, I mean, then you have that in play. And so I don't even remember what the number is, but it's a billions and billions of dollar industry. We hear about this all the time, and none of us are making very good money. Yes. So it's, the capitalists will come in and look at it as a way to make money, but it has nothing to do with the skilled laborers that are doing it. I think that's why. Thank you.
Thank you. And if there's one more short question, we could take it. Anyone in the chat or in the room?
So
do we have a?
Hi. So I'm Kelly. Hi. I'm curious for anyone who's worked between financial translating or interpreting and English. Like we've been talking a lot about kind of having to slash something, like being an interpreter and also picking up another skill set. But I'm curious, sort of what that looks like in terms of, would that be taking business classes, taking classes on finances, international finance, maybe looking to get just on the ground experience, just sort of what does that look like?
I take a crack. Since I mentioned finance, I actually have an MBA and I worked at Bear Stearns. So my business, the way I developed it was financial interpreting at conferences and financial translating, because I literally, when the Soviet Union was breaking up, was starting from scratch and inventing the language. So now I do not know what would you do, but I don't think without an understanding of the financial markets and some sort of formal foray into that, you can do that /interpreter/. So I was still an interpreter and translator, but I was speaking the same language as my clients were. So that enabled me to do very, very well until 2014, and the annexation of Crimea wiped out the Russian financial market altogether. But that's one way. I got lucky doing that for maybe 15 years. If my colleagues want to jump in and say something else to that effect.
I have to tell you that most of us previous generations of interpreters actually started with the other and then became the / interpreter, right? So it worked the other way around. I was, for example, a musician and audio engineer back in my country, and I came here and I was bilingual. And I come from a family of translators and interpreters, and I kind of like had done it because family, right? But never seriously. Then I come here, I realize I can make a living out of it, right? I think you just have to kind of turn it around, right? You're studying this now. That doesn't mean there's a lot of interdisciplinary programs out there that will allow you to perfect what you're doing while acquiring those new sets of knowledge of or specializations that you're looking for, that you're interested in. And I would suggest looking into those. But there's a lot of liberal arts programs, especially, that are allowing a lot of leeway in combining whatever it is that you're doing or that you want to continue improving on and putting almost anything else. My son is a musician. He's in a conservatory and he's double majoring in flute performance and Spanish. But yes, the institutions will allow that now, and I think that sky's the limit. I think pick and choose, start digging into what your program will allow you to do. Will they let you, for example, if you are going into your doctoral studies, there's a wonderful inter-university consortium. I was able, when I was doing my PhD, to go take classes at Columbia University. Some of my colleagues went to Princeton to take classes. While I was based in the Graduate Center, my experience as a student expanded. And I think a lot more graduate programs at the master's level are starting to also allow that. And I think that's something that you should start looking into. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it seems we are finishing perfectly on time because it is 8:30. And so Professor Tay, I don't know, do you have any closing remarks? And thank you to our faculty members so much and to our listeners. The fascinating discussion.
You were really anything at all, right? I was, because I'm sure, you know, things are kind of going out of our ears. You've heard so much, but just a big shout to the students, Ziwen, to Daniela, Anna, Lori, who's and you know, I'm not supposed to do this, but I will because I still haven't heard from HR. So the program finally has a college assistant. And so I'm still the one person in terms of faculty, you know, here on campus. And thanks to the wonderful faculty that I have as adjuncts, you know, otherwise I don't know how we even come to this you know, this place right now. So yeah, and now we have Anori. She's our first college assistant for the program. So welcome. And thank you very much, guys. You know, people signing on Zoom. This is wonderful, and I'm totally grateful and humbled, you know, for all of you and your engagement and, you know, coming together for this sharing session. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Bye.
Great pleasure. Yeah, nice meeting you.
Yeah, you too.